everyone.
Hello, welcome to season 2 of Hot Pot Talks. I am Jen Sunshine here with my dear friend and longtime creative partner, David Ng. You might know us as the co-founders and co-artistic directors of Love Intersections, a media arts collective that produces documentary films about QT BIPOCs. We're also members of the Vancouver Artists Labour Union Cooperative, also known as Value Co-op. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that David and I are beaming this live from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. To support Indigenous land defenders, and the link will be dropped into the chat now.
Yeah, Hot Pot Talks is a weekly series live streaming to YouTube and Facebook every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, where we have free-flowing conversations with artists, activists, chefs, performers, poets, community organizers about what it means to be an artist facing today's realities. What ethical responsibilities do we have as artists on topics ranging from anti-Asian racism, BIPOC futurity, Chinatown solidarity, diasporic food cultures, and interrogating the boundaries between everyday activism, fine art, and cultural work. So Jen and I, so why Hot Pot Talks? So Jen and I, we founded Love Intersections 7 years ago, oh my goodness, on the core philosophies of collaboration, invitation, and doing work in relationship with communities to tell stories that intervened on systems such as race, gender, sexuality, class, and ableism. And a core part of our work as social practice artists has been really to interrogate the boundaries of art, philosophy, community work, and activism. And so when the pandemic happened earlier last year, and a lot of Jen and my creative projects had to be put on pause, we imagined Hot Pot Talks as a way to continue this dialogue on art and cultural production with guests that we wanted to connect with that had contributed to this work and dialogue, which is why we're so excited to talk to Paul Wong and Dana Claxton today, two artists who have been at the forefront of these conversations for a very long time.
To help us continue creating the space for these conversations to happen, please consider supporting us through our limited edition tote bags, which are available for purchase on valuecoop.ca, and it is now 25% off. Oh my God. Have you eaten today simply means I love you in BIPOC language, a simple question that is asked by so many of our parents, elders, and aunties everywhere, evoking a shared familial understanding of love and tenderness. And these feelings of unspoken care inspired Hot Pot Talks, where culture and community nourish our bodies and for our hearts too.
So I have to say, Jen and I were laughing about this because we have a question for Paul and Dana about the commodification of art. And here we are touting our tote bag.
I want to thank our incredible team of Cameron, our lead project coordinator, and Lamia, our social media coordinator, who helped make Hot Pot Talks a reality. Now, without further ado, welcome Dana Claxton and Paul Wong.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Dana. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Oh, so this is me. I got a question that I wanted to start us off with. So Paul and Dana, you two have been friends for a very, very long time. Can we start with a question of how you two met? How did you two meet? And tell us a little bit about your friendship.
Dana?
Shall I start? Okay, thank you. First, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be here with both of you. And it's been great thinking about this in preparation. I met Paul initially as an observer watching him as an artist in the art scene in Vancouver in the early 1980s. And it was very much an underground punk art scene. And it was very dynamic and it was amazing, actually. And Paul was very much a cultural art leader. And so I would see him from a distance, and and knew that he was with Video In, and he often, a few times, he said, come by sometime, because to Video In, and I didn't quite have the courage to go. I was still kind of finding my own political voice, my own Indigenous voice, my own feminist voice. And then in the early 90s, it could have been 1990, I was walking in the East Village, not the East Village, on Broadway somewhere in New York, close to the East Village, I believe. And I looked, and Paul Wong was there in a restaurant. And I was like, there's Paul Wong. So I ran back to the restaurant, and then we connected in New York and had a great time there. In fact, I was thinking, Paul, the first time I went to the Museum of Modern Art was with you and Rick Erickson.
What did we see? You have such a good memory. That's amazing. I mean, I do remember, seeing you, a lot around the art, fashion, and music, punk scene, new wave scene, because we were just so active then as young, emerging, radical kinds of people, ambitious and curious, and a lot of questions to ask. So there was a lot of interdisciplinary crossover between those sectors, and certainly you were very eye appealing, I have to admit. Also young and beautiful, and coming from so many different places, and all kinds of converging in the downtown East Side, near Video In, and the downtown scene. I was fascinated by that energy of where everyone was coming from, and kind of this kind of really creative space. And of course, as one of the co-founders of Video In, which is now Vivo Media Arts, in 1973, when I was 17 or 18. We were asking all those questions, how to democratize art and media and accessibility. And of course, DIY Artist One Center was about inviting people to come by and play and see and do. So the fact that, I extended you that invitation was actually that, was to just like we're doing here, sharing space and building community. So, but I do remember that you worked at Details magazine in New York when I ran into you, which I was quite impressed by.
So I want to ask this question, because this is sort of when we were thinking to put the four of us, or specifically the two of you, in conversation. One of our main inspirations was the different journeys that both of you have had in terms of pushing the boundaries of art, content, and form. Dana, for example, when I saw your work, specifically your piece Brattle at the Vancouver Art Gallery show Fringing the Cube, I was just. And for folks who haven't seen it, it's this amazing, immersive, multi-channel video installation that really immerses the audience in a Lakota spirituality. And I was thinking about the significance of this, of doing it in the building that was once the colonial courthouse, right? And I was thinking about, and of course, you're not the only Indigenous artist that has obviously showed work at the art gallery, but I was specifically the immersiveness of that type of Indigenous ontology in a space that was literally built to exclude Indigenous worldviews. And I was at the same time thinking, Paul, we had a really nice conversation after Jen and I premiered our film Yellow Peril Queer Destiny, and you shared about how your whole life has been fighting for the legibility of queer, of color arts to be put on a screen like this. And so it's kind of I'm just going to plop that there in the middle of this conversation. I'm wondering if you both could maybe share some of these memorable moments of these fights for anti-racism fights, diversity, decolonization.
Well, I remember one thing about going back to the 80s, and, it was like you would go to demos. It was like, are you going to the demo this weekend? Are you going to the demo on Friday? Well, either that or the club, of course. And so it was, but it was the punk scene was very political, and not necessarily about race politics, but it was political about capitalism. I went to Rock Against Reagan, Rock Against Racism, actually, and Rock Against No Nukes in the harbor in the Burrard Inlet. So there was a particular, as there was a politic with punk. And then at the same time, I was working as well as studying at the Spirit Song, which was the Native Indian theater company. And then I took some training with another video. We were trying to have our own Indigenous TV station on the cable network. So there was this convergence of all these politics going on. There was Indigenous politics, there was punk politics. And then so it really primed me for then stepping into which I love. And some people, aren't cozy with identity politics, but the late hearing those conversations of exclusion and unpacking racism within the hierarchy of visual art and dissemination and work being seen in public institutions. And that's where Paul came home one day from a conference and brought me into that circle.
That would have been the Minquan Panchayat, and I think that was in the early 90s. We had been, as outsiders, certainly as someone who picked up a video camera and co-founded a video experimental documentary and media arts center, we were outsiders. Nobody respected no one respected artists anyway. And that's still a problem today, even though we're in it. They're taught very early on that, artists and art don't really matter. So when you picked up, a grainy, low resolution, glitchy video camera, and tried to fend yourself off as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, as an educator, and as a fine artist, they all laughed. The mainstream media, educational television, the galleries, schools, they kind of put up with us, and we did our own thing. So that was the part of the building our own institutions and our own centers, because really they didn't want anything to do with us. And certainly that took really a long time to get acceptance. And most of that time, most of that was done by kicking down the doors. And I think and that was started in like 1973. By the late 80s, there was a lot of discussion around otherness and identity politics and exclusion and racism and Eurocentric and white supremacy and colonialism. And one of the things that I was very involved in was the artist-run network of 100 funded artist-run spaces across the country. And there was interest and curiosity and an edit by that organization to embrace change and inclusion. So there was a number of us in leadership positions who went to that conference and walked away there with a mandate to transform and open up that organization called ANPAC, the Annual Association of the National Association of Artist-Run Centers, mostly government funded. And we opened that up by inviting, each of us invited somebody else from our community, from our region, to grow the circle, which we did. So within a year, our mandate was to, what we thought was to broaden the membership.
And did the membership broaden?
Well, what we did was it culminated in the festival and the annual general meeting in Calgary, called the Minquan Panchayat Gathering, where we invited 40 plus guests to perform, show, talk their art, and for many of those collectives and non-funded groups to become members. We were so blindsided by our own good-heartedness, we didn't see the threat that we had posed to the organization. And there was a rebellion, not from us, but from the membership that did not actually want radical change. They wanted a few acceptable new members that could assimilate into the fold.
Of course, fascinating.
So we were left humiliated, threatened, devalued, and basically disinvited from the proceedings.
Wow.
And we left Calgary, and as one of the inner circle of the leadership of the Minkwang Panchayat, I was embarrassed, hurt, and really embarrassed that I had brought so many other people from outside communities to that center to basically have everyone bitch slapped.
I'm wondering, it's interesting hearing this story. Jen and I had a conversation with our friend Nancy and Kieran a couple days ago around similar issues of like trying to bring diversity and inclusion into different institutions. And it seems like these patterns, I mean, I haven't experienced something quite as aggressive as what you're describing, Paul. But I'm thinking around these like these tokenistic gestures of representation as well. Dana, you shared before this talk an article about the book Other Conundrums by Monica Gagnon, and she reflects on both actually you and Paul's work in that book, and talking about the Canadian art sector and arguing that these gestures of representation are not enough, right? And that this facade of multiculturalism in Canada gets us to think that, hey, everything's okay because we're multicultural, and sort of also in a way entrenches this resistance to anti-racism efforts that are trying to make interventions that are structural. So I'm wondering, have you seen these sorts of patterns, like what you're describing? And I've certainly experienced that as well. What have these patterns been like? Do you have any other memories of these sorts of debates about representation?
Well, what am I thinking? I was thinking about how do we get away from it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's like this, it's cyclical. So it's happening again in different ways, thinking about, how do we have equity, diversity, inclusion that's meaningful, that's not tokenistic. Yeah. And, and especially within the arts, and so many museums now where it's, they're, with the Black Lives Matter reckoning and, and sadly with the announcements a few weeks ago with the residential school children of the Kamloops, is that it's a matter of hearing, right? That how are people going to hear these things and think, we really need to make some vast structural change. And the only way you can make vast structural change apparently is through radical gestures. And it has to be radical. It can't be this slow, But I was thinking about in terms of interpretation and analysis of art, and thinking like how, why has it been that BIPOC and Indigenous people were excluded for so long from within the analysis of art? Because that's where we're in this field of art. And of course, for Indigenous people and Chinese folks and other communities, initially were excluded from even going to university, right? So that's from baseline, couldn't go to university. And for Indigenous people, when they could legally go to university after their cultures were criminalized and made against the law for 80 years in this country, people wanted to go into law. People wanted to go into law and see what has happened here. And then they wanted to go into education to educate our own people, And so art was a luxury to go to art school. So there was few people at art school for many, many years, and in film school and those kind of things. But so in terms of the analysis of art, if we haven't had BIPOC and Indigenous people analyzing our art, I think that to me still needs a lot of work. Being within the institution and seeing lovely young art historians come and study and across the country, and there's still a void there of people of color and Indigenous people at that helm of the production of knowledge of the study of art. I think it's significant. So I think there's work to be done there in terms of equity.
Thank you.
I mean, I was very fortunate that, and really through working collectively, like Video In and with other people, I was able to show my work in many educational institutions at a very early age. I have many people have come to me and said, your appearance at my school in Quebec or the suburbs here, or Emily Carr in Toronto, seeing you and stand in front of the class and share and show your work that was about your life and your community, shifted them, because there was such I didn't even realize it as much. I realize it more now, that the importance of being visible and taking up space.
Paul, I knew that you were also an outsider, just like me, because you are renowned. If you are a queer Asian coming of age, growing up in Vancouver, the name Paul Wong, and certainly
I learned video at Video In.
Yeah. But the moment that I knew, because I think I had met you maybe must have been through the Vancouver Queer Film Festival. But I knew the moment that you were a true outsider was when I saw you at a rave. And I knew that this was a person that was a weirdo like me, and that I knew that there was there. Because we're both weirdos. I digress.
No, but and Bell Hooks wrote about it so beautifully about when you don't see self, so there's that invisibility, the structural invisibility, and that seeing self within the visual, within the field of art is equally as important as within any profession.
And Jen, I have to say that when I sort of focused on seeing you around and realized the kind of work that you were doing with the Queer Film Festival, particularly with Out in Schools program, I was very impressed, because just to see someone young, mouthy, critical, and politicized, and also with your group Love Intersections. It's particularly the kind of presence you've had in the last 4 or 5 years. Certainly, with my having a studio back in Chinatown, to actually see visible, mouthy, and not silent majority, because it's we get in trouble. People don't really like troublemakers. That where we always have the next question, and we are asking for answers, and we're not always saying this is just great, and as artists, we ask the questions. I know you guys are asking the questions. Sometimes we're just asking the questions. We're not even wanting an answer. And sometimes that question's never been asked. And sometimes asking those questions makes us very vulnerable, and puts people tend to challenge what we're kind of putting out there and what we're asking, because they don't want to hear those asks, because they don't want to really. They want to hear that there's no answer.
Well, I think about, when we were putting together Hot Pot Talks too, it started off as an exploration of Chinatown and diaspora, really thinking about structural race and cultural production. And, when Jen and I put together our roster, if you will, for season 2, we were like, what is the theme? Why are we putting Dana and Paul? And then next week we have, drag artists in the following week, and really sort of also asking that question of, if we're talking about challenging, or, in our case, trying to have conversations around these systemic issues that we face as racialized artists, why can't we put Paul Wong and Dana Claxton one week, and then drag artists another week? We have a nutritionist the following week to really unpack these questions in a different way. That's not just, I'm just going to talk to visual artists today, and then, drag artists in another series or whatnot. Yeah.
And I know that, again, this is great that you put Dan and I together, because we actually are never framed together. Even though
which is wild to me.
Well, I can kind of say, Dana, when we spoke before in our first meeting, you were talking about sort of the cube, right? Your show, Fringing the Cube. Right. And Paul, you're very much, I think, in my opinion, reject the cube in many ways.
Anti-cube.
Anti-cube. So with this part of why we thought it would be an interesting conversation to have the two of you chat.
Yes, because I remember saying, I love the cube. I feel safe inside the cube.
Yes.
There's something about it that, of course, love being in the gallery, right? You love being in the studio, love being in the gallery, love being in the classroom. But at the same time, those places haven't been, the one thing with Paul and I always think that we're both insider outsiders. Because, we're well entrenched in the Canadian art world. Like, we're, well entrenched. But at the same time, as outsiders as well. And, Paul is, I was thinking about all the years that Paul was practicing artist on his own, sort of this constantly, this sort of, this supernova circulating in the Canadian art world by himself, for a long time, starting at 16 in that scene, right? And, over the years, of course, there's more and more BIPOC and Indigenous artists within those pockets, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, I really thinking about analysis of art, and I think there has to be more Indigenous art historians and more BIPOC art historians to I don't know what the language is, not to level out the playing field, but at least to have a different type of analysis of what we're making.
Yeah.
So
go ahead, Paul.
So I was just going to say, Dana has, one of the great things, I guess, about Dana and I's friendship and as colleagues, so I think we've really have been very supportive of each other. Sometimes less, sometimes more, sometimes on a daily basis over the decades. And, I've really had a chance to listen and learn and witness, Dana's journey, which often has been stumbling in the dark. To find that firebox, Dana. To arrive where she is now, and it certainly has not been. It's been with a lot of struggles, and I know with a lot of laughter and a lot of tears.
Yeah. Dana, when you were talking about what you mentioned earlier was really resonating with me, because I'm in the middle of writing my prospectus and looking at methodology for. I'm in a program where it's there's a dissertation and a creative output, and I was reading this piece by Natalie Lovelace, and she said, why are we in doing research creation? Why are we always in choosing methodologies or developing methodologies? Why are we just making it so that our methodologies fit the institution that excluded us in the first place? We should be developing methodologies. And I'm just thinking about when you're thinking about bringing in different analysis from BIPOC folks to thinking about how can we actually challenge those logics that excluded our practices and understanding in the first place. I was wondering, if I may pivot, I was really curious when Jen and I were putting this together. We were curious, who were your mentors? As Jen and I have been thinking about, and obviously part of the reason why we are invited the two of you is, of course, we love and admire the work that you do, and connect to your practice in all of these different ways. What was it like as an emerging artist? Who were the artists that inspired you and mentored you?
Well, I've had a number of key mentors. Even in high school, I was hired to be part of the stadium gallery by a woman named Karen McDermott, who was at the Vancouver Art Gallery Education Department, and she ran basically this circus outside the gallery, and hired me as a youth leader, and then I was allowed to hire more youth, who all turned out to be my friends in high school. But she, I think back at it now, she would go away, and she would leave her fridge full, and her freezer full, and her wine cellar full, and leave me her keys to her bungalow, in West Vancouver.
Amazing.
Who would do that from a street? From a street urchin, from East Vancouver. So, but people saw something in me, and gave me those opportunities, which I always try to give back. Certainly, someone like Michael Goldberg, who was from Quebec, but was really involved in a visionary around video art and democratic media, and who was really the father of video in. I just followed him around for a couple of years, including traveling around the world with him. Carrying his porta pack and sitting quietly and listening and observing and listening to his visionary ideas for social justice change and experimental art and performance, and met a lot of interesting people through him. And someone who also gave me an opportunity to be a co-founder in that organization, and just said, here, you can do this. You can put together this publication. You can shoot this video. You can, you can meet these people. So it's just creating opportunities for people, letting them in.
Would you say that mentorship and the kind of the idea of like the role of the mentor has become increasingly harder? Because that's what I'm finding now, because there's a lot to contend with in a accelerated digital era where there's so much going on. It's overwhelming. And everyone's looking for a mentor. I'm looking for a mentor. David's looking for a mentor. We're all looking for mentors. I think it's easy to mentor somebody else, but to find our own mentors has been a struggle, has been a challenge for me. And I remember Paul, when I invited you to participate in the Troublemakers project, so that you could in some ways mentor the queer youth that would then make a documentary film about you. And I think I had paired you up I match-made you with Jackson, and they made this film about you. It was like I have these like lofty ideas of how to that there's meaningfulness to the mentor-mentee relationship, but I'm finding it harder and harder to, I don't know how to make that relationship sustain and last. And perhaps there's not such a thing as like a lasting mentor-mentee relationship, that maybe one day at some point that then the student becomes the teacher. I don't know. But I myself am finding it increasingly more difficult to find mentors in the city and in this day and age.
I think it can be a community, forming a community, or even doing what I've been doing with Pride in Chinatown, and last year inviting David to participate and contribute to work, and just letting that happen. With one of these pivot projects, I think that in itself put together a group of artists, a bunch of storefronts, claiming a bunch of streets, and a momentum and a context. And I think those kinds of connections to that kind of project. I mean, I learned so much from doing that, because I've never done that before in those kinds of conditions. So it's not maybe not one person.
That's interesting, because I'm thinking about the different experiences when I was young. When I first learned to make video at Video In, I think Cat Dodds is watching, but it was a project with that, youth. We got a tiny Canada Council grant, and a bunch of youth came together to make 2 videos, one on Asian sexuality, ironically, because then we made Yellow Peril Queer Destiny 25 years later. And then, well, not 25, I'm aging myself, 22 years later. And then the second film we did was Stereotypo, which is essentially, now that I think about it, it's basically the history of sexuality by Foucault, but for 14-year-olds. So very, very basic. But again, we've just had these, ideas, and we're given, time and resources to just make these ideas. I think actually, just to go back to the rave thing, we actually staged a rave at Video In. It was staged, so it was only a couple hours, but we were able to do that as 14, 15-year-olds, and then that really fomented my, eventually my my academic journey, and also my arts practice. So yeah, it's interesting just having the space to make mistakes and experiment.
And I think for me, just going back to the 80s, right? And being I always say I was the pretty girlfriend of a punk drummer. And I was very passive observer, but was a witness as well. And I was witnessing extraordinary artwork and extraordinary creativity. And so I was thinking about Orif Orifson, and not as any kind of mentor, but just watching some of the work. There was these 2 art bands. Tunnel Canary was one band, and another one, AKA. But they were such extraordinary art bands. And then the performance art that I saw, and then the video work through Video In, although nobody was an official mentor, but it was just seeing that kind of artistic expression that made me realize that there was possibilities for whatever was brewing and developing in me through Indigenous, independent broadcast, and then also through Spirit Song, and then Video In as well. Just put Tunnel Canary legendary. They were so legendary. Ayla and Ibra, I think, were their names, and they were extraordinary performers. And then Orif Orifson, his performance, I haven't seen a performance from him for a while, but it was amazing stuff. But also within the Indigenous community, I mean, my older sister, Kim Sue Goodtrack, has been sort of my main mentor my entire life. But also one of my aunties, who was an academic, biomedicine, and I started hanging out with her later in life, but in my 30s. But that was sort of, she was bringing me into not only our traditional ways, but also the importance of engaging scholarly, and how to engage scholarly. And then, as Paul said, community and friends. You mentioned Monica Gagnon earlier. She's been a great influence on me, as well as Paul has. For academia and scholarly, as well as a video production. And so I didn't set out to think, okay, I'm going to, get a formal education, and I want to become a professor, and I eventually want to become a head of a department. That was all very, I don't know what the word is, not stumbling in the dark, but more of thinking, how do we change? If we're going to make these changes that we're all saying we want to make, right? You have to go to those sources to make them. And so for me, the place of knowledge production is the university, and how to, bring that conversation into sometimes very rigid spaces, but I call myself a, not a hopeful, but a critical optimist, because because our institutions do want to change. I sincerely believe our institutions do want to change. And I think we're seeing that with artist-run centers and our larger municipal galleries. They know they have to change. They have to be much more inclusive, right? So, and the struggle of how to do it in a good way that's meaningful. But also, pedagogy and educators, they want to see those things change. Nobody wants to talk about stumbling around in the dark. Canadians have been stumbling around in the dark.
Yes.
To Indigenous history. So for this last few weeks, it's been so painful. But having so many people say, Dana, I did not know. And that's still, and it was in one of my very first films. I have actually had Orf Orfson I invited him to be an actor in the film as a performer, and he just rocked back and forth saying, "I did not know, I did not know," and that's still, it's like the Canadian mantra.
Yeah,
So it's a process, because if you had these layers of imperialism, oppression, Orientalism, I mean, all of these layers for centuries, it takes so long to unravel it and for one, identify it, right? Identify that power within it and the destruction of that power and how it dehumanized people and structurally dehumanized people. Unpacking it, unraveling it, identifying it, analyzing it, and then and then to rebuild something anew. I think that's where we're at now. It's the attempt to build something anew.
I'm curious for both Paul and Dana, how has the art world, because clearly there's been some significant changes and strives made, but I'm curious if you can share how has the art world changed from when you first kind of started and emerged? And what do you envision and see artists facing today that might be different from when you were starting out?
Well, change is incredibly slow.
Yes.
And filtered. We still only get a small slice of the pie, at the table. So, I've been involved in so many advocacy equity committees that have helped shifted policies, have opened spaces, that have diversified or have introduced, but I've been doing it for a really long time, and it's too slow. I'm not that patient a person. I never have been. I'm also self-taught, but people want to make change, but a lot of these institutions, the funding bodies, the mainstream, there's resistance to it. That's the problem. There really is. They want to make minor changes, but there's not a big earthquake going on yet.
That's true. The volcano has not happened. The volcano has not happened, but it just in terms of what is radical transformation, right? How do you do it? And it takes, it takes people in those positions of, quote, power who can say, we need to do this and we have to do it tomorrow morning. And people can do that. People can do that, but it is a process. But I was thinking about the shifts, and certainly for Indigenous communities, for one, getting, having Quebec having the vote, since 1970, 70, I think it was 1970, Indigenous people got the vote in Quebec, rest of Canada in 1960. So you're dealing with, that kind of baseline, right? And, but it's been through education that we see more Indigenous curators. We only have a handful of art historians, though. There's only a handful in this country, but lots of artists. A lot of artists have gone through, through the systems of the MFA programs and the formal education for art. And as we know, you don't need a formal education to be an artist, but but still circulating within those realms. So change has happened. The fact that my position at UBC, that's a I don't know if it's a radical change, maybe it is, but it's a change that people welcomed and weren't fearful of, and because as Paul said, change is slow and you have to do it in increments, but then sometimes you have to say we have to do this right now, and we're seeing those kind of changes. So
I'm also seeing a lot more Indigenous content creators on platforms, especially like TikTok, where there is hyper visibility of Indigenous content creators, where they are, in charge of their own representation, their own voice, and what they push out. Notorious Cree, for example, is an amazing Indigenous artist that I follow on there. And having these conversations in the comment section with the wider, TikTok communities, depending on what side of TikTok you find yourself in, right? But they're having conversations like, eating the whale and the practices, and having conversations with like vegans and vegetarians, and having conversations around the indigeneity of it. So I'm seeing these micro changes in like very site specific spaces, like TikTok or like other comment sections, but I don't see that translating elsewhere. So it's like it's very particular niche pockets.
You don't see it translating elsewhere where?
Like, well, so if we're talking about social media, I'm not seeing it on, Facebook or Instagram. Like they have very different UIs. Yeah. The
So
user experience and UX. Yeah.
Like with TikTok, it sounds like people are just inserting themselves into the discourse. Let's debate the issues and we're going to actually engage.
Very
whereas
smart.
In places like Facebook Facebook at the comment section, although I try to avoid them. But Instagram is a little bit more.
Because Instagram's about, it's an aesthetic, right? It's ultimately about aesthetic and brands. It's been co-opted by brands, right? TikTok is probably going to get there eventually. So there's these different kind of ways that people take up space on social media that I appreciate, especially for like Gen Z. I'm finding them taking up space very radically in ways that I certainly did not have that kind of confidence at their age.
Because I haven't done a lot of, like, I missed Facebook, right? I just, somehow I just couldn't do it. So I missed it completely, unfortunately. But I did get into not TikTok, but
Instagram.
And so there's a lot of indigeneity on Instagram, depending on who you're following, right?
That's true. Mm-hmm.
And, but I was also this has made me think about those who have no interest in wanting to engage in these structures and these systems, right? And for good reasons, or like if you talked earlier, David, about the commodification of art, and how that might be, and just thinking about how when you sell art, then are you implicated in the commodification of art? And it's the art has so many homes. Like it has so many homes. It can be an installation and having an exhibition in your car, to commercial galleries, to the biennales, to the art fairs, to the public galleries, to the artist-run centers. There's so many homes for art, and it circulates as so many things, as commodity or simply as aesthetic pleasure or aesthetic confusion, but it also, of course, circulates as a profound place for autonomy. And I'm not saying that in any kind of liberal sense, but I still believe that art is a place for love, and that art is a place for autonomy.
For me, artists didn't create this mad chaos in this world, but we get to contribute to constructing and deconstructing and intercepting and interrupting that chaos. And that's to me the most exciting art and artists that certainly speak to me. And just so just over the last 30 years, I mean, the most exciting shift that we have seen, and it really has been through a few artist-run centers like the Grunt, a few visionary leaders and curators. I'm honored to have been a witness to the extraordinary development and rise and maturing of some incredible contemporary Indigenous art and artists. I mean, I think that are just on fire now. But it's taken 30 years of creating space, facilitating through experimentation, through failures, through trial and error, through love, and through a lot of laughter and tears to see this extraordinary community that didn't exist 30 years ago, that now actually does exist, and it's very visible.
Yeah, Paul, you've done. I mean, I'm just thinking. I mean, Paul, when Dana was talking about what shape does art, what form does art take, or where is art? You've done a lot of work or poking at that. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm specifically thinking about even just going back to the conversation about commodification. I mean, I forgot what's the piece called again? Video art, the neon.
Oh.
Yes, well, I made for my first big commercial gallery show on the Windsor Gallery on Granville Street. I made an RGB 15-foot neon called video art. And because and people bought that who would never buy a piece of actual video art.
Right.
They would buy this light thing, like that globe that said video art. So that was completely done very ironically and totally tongue-in-cheek for me to making as a video artist, making an object. And it was done in an edition of 5, and it's in corporate and private home museum collections. So, but that was the whole. I'm not very good at making a commodity art. Anytime I'm kind of faced with making something that is supposed to be an object to sell, it's usually a failure or I kind of lose interest.
I'm curious, since we have both Dana and Paul here. Dana, how would you describe Paul's work and practice? And then Paul, yeah.
And I was thinking about this question, but the one thing I was thinking is daring. It's been very daring, and certainly right from the very beginning. I love that one, Paul. Remind me of the name of it, where you're walking around Main Street and you're a young man. What is the name of that one?
Becoming a Man.
Becoming a Man. I love that piece. I think it's very brave. I do. I think it's very brave. I think it's daring. I think his work is very honest. I think it's very raw. I think his work is very raw. And also I think it's very intuitive. He works as maybe artists should, but sometimes artists become too, thinking about things way too much, where I think he works very intuitively. So that's how I would describe his work. Honest and intuitive, raw, brave, daring, challenging. Thinking about confused sexual views, that work, which is so tame. I mean, the other day on TV, I see that they're doing a show like that, and even way racier, way more provocative, but that work, he was wanting to talk about sexuality. That must be 30 years ago, I guess. And, it was too taboo. And he's also been interested in the taboo in many of his projects. He's looking at taboo. Blending Milk and Honey was all about race relations that people didn't want to talk about. And then I was thinking about the Minquon Panchayat and the park, when they called us cultural terrorists. And I remember I was so offended that they called us that when we were trying to do something that was going to be good for people. And yeah, it was not to bring that up again, but but the taboo. So I think that Paul's been interested in the taboo, but also within a Chinese context as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was the piece. Sorry, the one about uncomfortable sexualities. That was the one that was censored.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Dana. Dana always surprises me because she is very quiet and very calm, and then produces these very ambitious works that, on the surface of many of these works, you don't realize. She's been in a production for a week with 25 people. To produce a photograph, or that suddenly you see this video, and I have no idea where it came from, because she's not noisy about it. She is. Even though we in communication on and off over the years, a little or a lot, suddenly these things surface, and that finally to see her major solo show at the VAG 2 years ago was completely shocking and surprising, because I hadn't seen most of that work. I've heard about some of those works. I've seen bits of those works, but to see the combination of those, suddenly it made sense to me about all parts of Dana that I had only seen kind of like from here and here. So it's yeah, she did. I think Dana really speaks through her work, and of course, I don't get to see the part of her where she's now considered to be a leading academic, and there's all kinds of panels and talks. And aren't you producing like all kinds of books these days or something?
Well, I have to say, I don't believe I'm seen as a leading academic. I think I'm seen as a leading artist that's a public intellectual. Is one thing, is how I put it, but yeah, you have to make these books, and you've made books too. Sometimes you have to publish your own books because they're not being made, right? And so thinking about Image, which was the Indigenous Media Arts Group, which we were housed out of Video In for almost the duration of its existence for 8 years. We published a beautiful book, I have to say, about Indigenous media art, because there wasn't anything circulating out there.
So
would you two consider co-writing something?
I was thinking too, is that we've never, I've rarely ever collaborated with anybody. The first person I collaborated with was Janine Fitnett-Julie, who was, her supervisor in a graduate program, and then we become friends, and we collaborated together, and it was such a beautiful experience. And we made the sew-in, and it was installed at the Belkin Gallery, and it was to bring women in to sew ribbon skirts, and for men to make ribbon shirts, and it was beautiful. And my sister taught people how to sew these things, and there was some public programming around it, but I had never ever even had an inkling to collaborate with somebody. But then I've collaborated with writing, that you're asking, Jen, with Tanya Willard. We wrote 2 or 3 essays together, and that was a great experience. But Paul and I've never collaborated with each other, but I've been in 2 of his works. One as a drunken Indian in an alley, and one he was interviewing people, I think it was blending milk and honey. So I've been in his works, yeah, but we have worked together collaboratively.
So because we're talking books, this just arrived by courier, an advanced copy of Occupy Canada. I have 1 copy that arrived today.
That is nice.
I was not going to tell them, but this is taking a team of people to produce.
Yeah.
Wow.
Things and stuff. So it's so 1 copy, advanced, just arrived today. So cloth bound, silver, color, vellum.
Nice.
Wow.
Just to make a beautiful, beautiful book about the Occupying Chinatown project that I've been working on for the last 3.5 years, and this is kind of one summation of those dozen or so projects. That
it's just another amazing example of, you know, of Paul's DIY, you know, and then publishing this elegant book, and then the Yellow Peril book and the books that he's brought forward has been, you know, as an autonomous person outside of the thing about sometimes university publishing, of course, it's all peer reviewed and, you know, and that's a good thing too, but there's limitations sometimes to those, to that, where Paul hasn't been under that type of, what's the language here?
I've not needed the institutional validation.
Right. But you got it anyway. Well, I'm wondering, it is 6 o'clock. Dana, is there anything you want to share that you're working on? Paul, I'm so excited about Occupying Chinatown.
I wish I had my new book to flip through.
Oh,
I have the galleys for it, but I don't have the book here at all.
Let's see the galleys.
No, actually, they're not here. I took them to my studio up to UBC. But sorry, what was it, the question? What am I working on?
Or any new work? I imagine you have tons going on, but I mean, in terms of any highlights that you wanted to share that you're excited about.
What am I excited? Well, I'm excited about July and August to have a nice break and to do some projects. I'm excited really about my position at UBC. I have to say, as I love being head and have some great colleagues. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about my sister coming to see me in July. I haven't seen her for over since the pandemic, and she's been at our home reserve. So she's coming to see me. I'm very excited about that. And just yesterday, no, what day are we? On Monday, I was at my studio at UBC. I haven't been for, you know, very much in the last year, but have thought I wasn't going to start any new work, but did, and I'm very excited about that, which I won't tell you what it's about. But yeah, so I'm just happy that the summer's here and I can be in my garden.
Nice.
Paul, how about you?
Well, I'm right this very minute working on a sound installation called "Be Like Sound," riffing off Bruce Lee's
Be Like Water.
Be Like Water, and it's a sound installation, a public art project for the Hall of 100 Rivers Courtyard. And it's a City of Vancouver, Dr. Sonia Sen commissioned project. And we've just working on the script. We've just designed, it's going to be a 6-channel sound work only. And probably we're hoping to have it launched and by late September. So that's
cool.
what I'm working on this sound this summer, and it's my first time doing a sound only project.
Wow.
So,
Amazing. And that's at the Sun Yat Sen?
Yes.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing.
So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Great.
Be Like Sound.
Yes.
We love sound. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to just take this time to thank you both, Dana and Paul, for coming on Hot Pot Talks and having this incredible conversation. I wish this could go on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, thank you. Don't leave yet. We're going to say bye to you in a moment.
Oh my goodness. I have so many other questions that we didn't even get to. We over-prepared as usual, David. Okay, well, that was wonderful. So do we want to announce next week's guests?
Yeah, we kind of already did.
Oh, yeah, we did. It's Shea Dior and Queen Made in China.
Yeah.
Very excited. Same time, same day, every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific time.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night.